Hi, guys, and welcome to the Train Right podcast. Today's guest, we're speaking with Timothy Tate. Now, Timothy Tate is a psychotherapist. We'll get into this more in the podcast, exactly what that is. He has over 10 years of experience in teaching psychology at various universities from California to also Bozeman, Montana, where he actually has his own private practice for the past 20 years. 30 years, my goodness. So he's got a lot of experience. I met Timothy through the North Face, where he's also a consultant for the North Face team. And why do athletes need a psychotherapist as a consultant? Well, especially in most recent years and throughout history of athletics, especially in mountain sports, there's been a history of people dying, either due to avalanches, climbing accidents, and in my case, a nearly fatal fall during a running race back in 2017. Timothy and I will speak to the importance of catering to your mental wellness, not only your physical health, and how these two can complement each other, and both are absolutely necessary to maintaining optimal performance, but also wellness and health. I really hope you guys enjoy this. He's a pleasure to speak to. Here we go. So, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Hello. Hello, Hillary. Thank you for having me on your podcast. Yep.
Yeah. So I've already kind of introduced the guest of who you are. I got to know you through Conrad Anchor and through the work of you do with the North Face. But I'd like to just start by, can you kind of summarize what your practice is about, based out of Bozeman, Montana, and kind of generally speaking, what you do?
Yeah, gladly. I've been in practice here in Bozeman, Montana since 1983, so it's been a while. I have established a psychotherapy practice and have named it as such for that entire run of time, because I believe that psychotherapy is more to the causes of our concerns than management of symptoms, which counseling or psychology might address more as a priority. So by causes, I mean what it means for us as individuals to live a meaningful, authentic life and find our own calling, rather than if you're feeling good or bad or having trouble at home or worried about this, that, or the other thing. So psychotherapy, in my mind, is a depth look at our character and how we are called to be ourselves and the troubles that come in way of doing that.
Yeah, I mean, this is something. So when I met you, I've been to a counselor before. Like talk therapy, I think it's really, really important. And my work as a coach, I think oftentimes when I'm coaching athletes, like I'm mostly managing their feelings and kind of how they're feeling or navigating the general world, as opposed to just like prescribing them workouts to prepare for a race. And
sure.
Yeah, like how is that similar to what you do? Because you work with, someone like Conrad Anchor. He's a major member of the North Face team, an alpinist, someone who, he has to manage, fear and all of these things in the mountains to kind of pursue his goals. But how do you see that also relevant for just the general population of athletes in general?
Yeah, well, I think that when we talk about the risk-taking or the endurance or what it takes to rise to the top in your particular discipline, there is a mindful or brain concentration or orientation that is exceptional. And in my work with such people as yourself or Conrad or others on the team, I am intrigued by what calls them to reach beyond what is normal limits. And so there are a couple of ways that you can be motivated to do that. One is to somehow egotistically prove that you're better than others, excuse me, and that usually doesn't get you to the top. It's usually some form of compensation just because you feel inadequate in some way. You overcompensate and strive to be the best of something or another. That usually is kind of a neurotic way to do this. Then there's another way that I think you embody and the people that I've met in the North Face Elite team, and that is that there's this curious call to excel, to be the best person, to be the best athlete. And it's not about making up for something or compensating. It's for something you can't help but doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's of interest to me.
Yeah, that is really interesting to me because I feel like a lot of people that I work with are like athletes in general. It's like this lifestyle. So it really is this kind of this life that you can embody. But I also see where this community can be an empowering thing. It can be a place where you can, like you said, explore ways to be the best version of yourself. But there's also this darker side to it, where I mean that I've experienced it too, where and it can be like at a professional level if you're competing, but it can be, I think, at any level where this darkness also kind of creeps in, where your passion can it's a flame that burns so brightly that it can ignite the way, but it can also threaten to consume you. Yeah.
Well, you're introducing, the main kind of course of my practice, and that is facing or encountering our personal shadows, our personal dark sides. And, we don't perhaps want to get too philosophical here, but at the same time, unless we have the tools or the courage to face our own shadow, we tend to act it out in the world, and that usually works out pretty badly because it's being driven by forces we don't understand. And so in the experience I've had with athletes, you'd think there'd be tremendous egos and I'm the best and I'm always the one that you want to know about, kind of like selfies on steroids. But the people I've met in North Face are not that way. They are actually simply doing what they are called to do. And the shadowy part of it is the competition to stay in the limelight or stay on top or stay sponsored or be noticed. And that's tough stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I
meaning that, go on.
No, sorry. You go for it.
Meaning that the pressure on the athlete to perform is something we can't just dismiss. That is a huge part of each athlete's psyche and what they are consumed by.
Mm-hmm. And I think that this can be applied to someone at any level, because like you mentioned, it's like getting out of your own way, or kind of getting out of your like a quote unquote ego, your ego's way of like, what it means to not have, like, of course, like people want to have the best performance of their life. And like part of the reasons of this podcast is to, inform the masses of like, okay, what are the best coaches out there doing? What are the best athletes out there doing to improve performance? But I think a big part that we miss out on is the mental side of wellness, and like how we can get in our own way. And I think that's applicable to, to anyone, whether you're trying to win a race or just like set a personal best.
I think so. When you say get in your own way, part of what I do with individuals is help them understand the difference between persona and character. And without going too deep in that, what we mean by persona is often confused with the word ego. So let me just talk here for a second about these three zones, okay? Mm-hmm. So anyone who is going to accomplish their calling in life has to have a strong ego. That's like the foundation of everything else. And that ego comes into place and to shape in our first years of life. Then upon that ego, we build a persona, which is a response to the demands of our society and family of origin. And that's where the neurotic element is introduced into our experience, because we're just trying to be loved, we're just trying to be seen, we're just trying to be secure. And so we do strange things to accomplish that goal in our family of origin and in our society, trying to chase after some norm. I think one of the more neurotic questions is, I just want to be normal. Or, what does that mean? It's an endless chase. And then sometime in the 20s, early 30s, that persona starts to run out of gas. And often earlier in people who are exceptional, like yourself and other athletes, who they don't really care about satisfying others as much as they care about fulfilling a drive within themselves, and that's what I call calling. And so in many ways, I'm kind of a midwife helping people be born out of their persona into their character. And exceptional people don't have a choice. They've been that way their whole life. Mm-hmm. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it reminds me of something that we talked about and you already touched on it a little bit. It's like people, like they can't help but like do what they're made to do. Like, I think one of the conversations that we had when I was out in Bozeman was that, I was like, I'm afraid if I stop like this negative self-talk, then I'm not going to do well. Right? Like, I have to tell myself this story that like, oh, Hillary, like you're not very good at running, or you need to be faster, or like, I was afraid that if I stopped that I would, not stop trying as hard. But really it's part of me that I'm going to be, try my best and be driven. And, it's like, I kind of had to just get out of my own way. But I think it's, so maybe I possess that, but it's harder to, I don't know, to like let other people who don't have that to like practice it. It's like a continued practice, like every single day, just like someone's, training schedule, if they like to go outside, and run or bike or ski or whatever. It's not like, it is active work, but not in the way that I think athletes are used to, but I think it's just as important.
Yeah, I would agree, especially when you talk about the daily practice, Hillary. The times that, the times that I've spent in the backcountry, up in the mountains with Conrad Anker as an example, he cannot help himself push the edge and have a level of activity and engagement in doing things and trying things and risking things that other people would just go, "Are you crazy?" That would be kind of a phrase. And yet in his psyche and in my way of witnessing over the last 15 years of our friendship, his behavior is, it's like, come on, come to the edge, join me here. It's completely safe as long as you are in touch with your limits and what each step means. And most people get so caught up in either trying to do something or pushing themselves because they feel they have to push in order to excel. They make mistakes and get hurt.
Yeah.
So there is an energy within the individual who is exceptional, like you athletes, that could be described as neurotic. But in my experience, it's actually not. It is simply an agitation, an ambition, a drive that those who succeed in your sports accept about themselves and no longer fight themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, if someone was, I mean, it's taken me a lot of work to kind of to realize all these things, and
Yeah.
I don't know what your I think we talked about this a little bit, but what your opinion is on, if someone wants to incorporate this kind of into a daily practice. I know certain for me in particular, sometimes it's really hard to sit in silence and like meditation. But I know you laugh at this.
You think?
Why are you laughing? But I'd like to get your opinion on the importance of, because I think meditation can be like a pretty like simple thing that everyone can incorporate into their day. But what is your opinion on this? Like, do you think it's beneficial? I think it can be, it's like almost a fad now, but what do you think there are real benefits to meditation and mental work?
Yeah, no, I giggled only because the energy level in the people that you're talking to and coaching and yourself is so intense that the idea of sitting quietly is kind of like, sure, so it's a bit of a challenge, and you're right.
Yeah. It kind of terrifying. Like, I'm just like, I don't want, like, what? I've got all these things to do. I can't just sit here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah, no, that hits the heart of what you're really talking about, Hillary. Thanks for being vulnerable in this way. I don't, know that there is a prescription for meditation. There are certainly all manner of options that have been brought into popular awareness over the last 30 years, from the yoga surge of practicing yoga to the new age and to self-help, and then to the kind of interest in Buddhism and Zen and Taoism and all the things that we have now access to.
Mm-hmm.
And those traditions are time-tested and so valuable. But I think we have to find our own way on how to be quiet. And so for me, I have a walking meditation, a walking contemplation that I do each day between my sessions, where I walk around my neighborhood in Bozeman for 5 to 8 minutes, and I pay attention to my breath, and I listen to the birds. I watch the people go about their lives. I'm across from an elementary school, so I watch the kids play and listen to the laughter. In other words, I'm engaged in a contemplative way with what otherwise I would just be scurrying through to get through something or get to something. Mm-hmm. So a walking contemplation is one way. The other way, and several athletes have started to do that since they've worked with me, is to have a disciplined sitting practice where they begin each day with at least a half an hour of sitting quietly. And for me, that all comes back to how you are mindfully breathing. Mm. So being able to sit quietly, I have what's called a zafu, a sitting pillow in my office, and I sit on it from time to time, where you simply allow yourself to breathe consciously, because breath is the key to consciousness. Without conscious breath, you will not be able to develop your awareness.
And why is that?
Yeah. Well, without getting too esoteric, the Sanskrit word for that is, prana.
Yeah.
So the idea, and you runners certainly experience the high from deep breathing, the endorphin rush that comes with that. So we know that, or anybody who does hard aerobic exercise feels better. And that's because when we oxygenate, we start to access more of our brain and what I call our mind.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? You can't access the mind without mindful breathing, conscious breathing. Otherwise, you're trapped in your brain.
Yeah.
And this is the difference that some people don't understand, that we have both a brain and a mind.
Yeah.
And the mind is where consciousness sits. The brain is where our complexes and repetition and thoughts sit. So breath is the access to the mind.
I love this because I am okay. So, and if you would have asked me this maybe 5 years ago, I would have been like, okay, I'm not sure I believe all of this stuff because
Right.
I'm a scientist by training. And so I like the hard evidence and I want like, show me the studies and show me the numbers and blah, blah, blah. But in fact, I have a master's in neuroscience, and in graduate school, I realized just the sheer complexity of what human consciousness is. And we can't even explain it scientifically. Like we know the like some parts that contribute to it. We know some of the molecules and some of like the chemistry. But what you just described is like the merging of those two things. And I think regardless of how scientifically driven you are, how scientifically driven I am, you can't ignore the magical, it's basically, it's a magical mystery of what it is when a human thinks or like gets lost in their thoughts. Like I can't explain that in terms of chemistry. So, but that doesn't make it any less important. And yeah, you can go ahead.
No, I think that's very important to address. I am grounded in rational logic perspectives and am not interested in some sort of esoteric kind of fanciful thinking. But at the same time, let me put this into perspective. So when I was doing my postgraduate work at UCLA, I ran into two scientists who changed my life. Barbara Brown, who founded what we now call biofeedback, and John Lilly, who developed what is called the sensory deprivation tank or isolation tank.
Yeah.
And those two people had a profound effect on me because they were coming from pure science. And yet they ran into this X factor, which I'm calling the mind, that they couldn't explain away.
Yeah.
So with biofeedback, she realized that if we employ a dimension of our mind and see something on a screen or a tone or a sensation stimuli feedback, we can alter the neurological pathway. That's of interest.
Yeah.
And then John Lilly used the isolation tank or sensory deprivation to go into a state where there was no stimuli, where the brain was put out of a job, and then what happens? And he's written about that in a number of books. So when he said to the class, either the brain is a closed system or it's an open system, and then went on to discuss the pros and cons of it being a closed system, i.e. we are simply an artifact of our brain's activity and our experiences in our heredity, or as he called it, the leaky mind or the leaky brain, there's an opening, there's an access to something else. And so that's how I began thinking about this.
I mean, this is so interesting to me because when I always think about like a runner's high. It's something that like that I can explain chemically, for instance. Like, I mean, it's your cerebellum.
Right.
It's like reenacting rapid eye movement. You're scanning the ground from side to side as well as up and down. That's why you feel this like you kind of feel this like flow state or like rhythm, and then that's chemically where this idea of a runner's high comes from. But then,
Right.
but also people in the community of running and cycling and endurance sports in general, and sports in the outdoor world in general, they share this like unspeakable bond, right? This this thing where it's like you can't explain it, it's not tangible, but it's there, and it's what draws people together to, and it's what draws people, out by themselves to do big lines to the mountains. But it's also, you have that bond. And
Yes.
what I'm wondering is I mean, if that's there and that's tangible, it's why isn't it something that more people are paying attention to or nurturing on a daily basis? Because I think it's just as important as what drives us like to train or like physically prepare for something.
So that bond you're talking about among your fellow athletes is somewhat of an unspoken bond that comes with a shared sense of experiences at the edge of capacity. Tell me more.
Yeah. I mean, it's something like, so here's it's that shared feeling of like, everyone, if you go out for a group run, people have this runner's high, right?
Yep.
So
Right.
then kind of can form friendships, but also there's something that I think is liberating when you're out. Like some of my best friends have been made through sharing miles, in the mountains.
Yeah.
And there, you I don't know, I think things kind of fade away. You are a little bit more open, and you can just maybe more vulnerable. But yeah, there's this kind of like shared experience, and what brings us together. And when I was injured, and that was kind of taken away because I couldn't, share the physical activity with other people. It was something I had to work on cultivating, how I could feel that sense of community and connectedness to myself and other people, but separate from a physical act. Yeah, that's kind of more what I'm getting at.
Yeah, well, I'm intrigued with clans or tribes or individuals who band together or are drawn together because of mutual shared interests or passions. I think the human psyche longs for fellowship and intimacy and companionship. And yeah, you can get that at the bar watching TV, but that's a little lower energy than what we're talking about, because those of us who go out into the world, and I live the world meaning into nature, or push ourselves physically through some activity that often involves being in nature. That's why, of course, I live in Bozeman, because we have such access to walking in the mountains or being in the mountains. I think that access to nature and the wild plays an interesting role in what we're talking about. Yeah, you can get that running, in an urban, scene, like when I would visit New York and watch the runners do laps in Central Park. They were full of life, they were excited, they were talking with themselves as they ran around. And so I think there's two things going on here, Hillary. One is the companionship of individuals who are pushing themselves beyond the normal limits of a sedentary life and what comes from that shared experience. And then the other piece is that the more this is done in the wilderness or in the mountains, the more that nature is access, which to me is the best healing medicine of all.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
You can share the vistas, you can share the smells, you can share the sense of what you've experienced. If I run around the block, that's one thing. But if I just take a left and go up the trail into the mountains, that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah. And there was also something that I wanted to talk to you about. it was from a recent article that you wrote.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm gonna link it, to the end of this episode, so more people can read it. But you talked
Good.
about this balance, or if there is a balance of people with ambition and what ambition is, because I think it's kind of a general theme that we've been talking about is what drives us to be better, what drives us to keep going, search out those vistas. But there's also like this dark side of ambition. Can you tell us a little bit about this article that you wrote?
Yeah. I addressed what we're talking about because it seems so critical to the common experience I've had with the folks I've been introduced to in North Face, and also just my peer group in town. There's a growth, or not a growth, there is a demand within the human psyche to achieve something others haven't achieved, to excel. In mythology, it's called the hero's journey.
Yeah.
In the framework of Jungian philosophy and archetypal studies, which is kind of my context for my work, the hero's journey implies that either the heroine or the hero is able to go past where their father or mother or peers have not been able to tread. And so there's this longing for adventure that takes us beyond what others know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I called that ambition. A sentence that I wrote says, ambition brings us to a world beyond the common, reminding us that without effort and risk-taking, reality gets high-centered on the bog of the common.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, like, that's like,
I rest my case.
It's like in a nutshell of, why, why I, keep dreaming or, having adventures or like next races and things to do. But I think in that, another piece I think that's important with this ambition and, not wanting to get complacent basically is I've fallen in love with the process of kind of achieving without attaining it. I mean, this was something that was really striking that you talked to me about, is what comes with ambition is this constant need for wanting to achieve something, right? To go into that unknown.
Right.
But in that quest for achievement, you can't actually really attain anything.
Right.
And that can be a little bit of a crux. How can relate this to basically just relate it to running, like, right? If someone crosses the finish line and they do well, they set a personal best in a race. Well, like, really that's an achievement, but really there's nothing to hold on to. Like, you can't hold on tight to that moment because it's already gone. But that's like what's made it beautiful is the fact that it's fleeting. But then the next question, if someone is like, oh man, I have to keep attaining this, they immediately set their sights on another race, maybe not giving themselves enough time to recover or reflect on or celebrate the thing that they just achieved. Yeah, I think that can be like a I don't know, a darker side to this coin of ambition that we're talking about. And I don't know, I think that's where like the practice is for coaching, or for whether it's like, psychotherapy or coaching athletes, is maybe having them fall in love with this process of achievement, but without attaining it.
Yeah, no, that's very important, Hillary. And for me, it goes back to a story, and that story has to do with a philosopher whose name is Alan Watts, who's become more accessible in the last 10 years than he has been for a while. I don't know if you know that name, Alan Watts. He's a philosopher. Anyway, he brought kind of the notion of Zen to America back in the 60s. And I had an opportunity to meet and engage and work with him in the early 70s in Europe and Germany. And when I was taking him to the airport in Frankfurt for him to return to the West Coast, he lived in Mount Temple Pius in the San Francisco area. He took out a sheath for the what do we call the chopsticks that we were using at a sushi restaurant, which was all new to me in 1972. I mean, what the hell is this? We're eating raw fish? Nice. But he was a devotee of that, as well as sake, maybe a little too much on his side. But anyway, on the sheath of the chopsticks, he wrote in Sanskrit this riddle. And I said, that's beautiful, but what the hell does that mean? And he goes, you can attain it, you cannot achieve it. And that riddle has sat with me for, I don't know, all my years. And check this out, until this fall, Conrad and I were taking a walk with his retrievers, with Jenny and his retrievers, that we do regularly, almost weekly, in a particular place in the mountains here. And I was talking about this riddle that you have introduced, the difference between achievement and attainment. And suddenly it clicked, and I was able to understand the deeper meaning of it, which you have to discover on your own. And I'm not going to tell you the secret because it's mine and it doesn't matter. It's not yours. So, but the point of the riddle is what you're talking about. If you're attached to achievement, you're going to be successful at a certain level, but until you understand attainment that you cannot achieve, you're going to have a neurotic relationship with your personal activities, life, sports, accomplishments.
Oh, man. I love this, and it also drives me crazy. Remember the first time you said this riddle to me, and I was like, wait, what? I think I was like physically angry.
Say that again?
No,
I missed that. Would you?
No, I said I remember the first time you told me this riddle, and I was like physically angry. Right. I like didn't understand. And I think it's a continued, obviously it's like it is a something you continue to like to sit with and chew on and like try to figure it out. So
well, see, that's the point. Let's just underscore that for a second, Hillary. That's the point, or the point of the practice of the Zen meditation is there is a master or a disciplined person who gives the student a riddle to sit with.
Yeah.
Not just kind of like, but rather you can attain it, you cannot achieve it. Sit with it. And the whole idea in that form of meditation is to bear the tension of something that seems irreconcilable until it pops into something harmonious. And that practice is very important.
Yeah.
And as I probably mentioned to you, that's what Jung said was the heart or the essence of maturity. And I'll just run it by you again, that maturity is the capacity to bear the tension of irreconcilable paradox.
Oh man, then hopefully I'm getting more mature.
Yes, you are, Hillary.
I really think I am. Although some days,
you are.
Some days I can't. Some days it's like all the unknown is just a little bit too unbearable. but that's okay. That's also part of it.
Oh, right. Yeah, I call it a win, Hillary. If I can make it from my house to my office, it's a roaring 6-minute commute
Mm.
without flipping off one of these new people who've moved to town who are so aggressive drivers, So I understand that.
Oh my goodness. Okay, great. So even the master has to work on things too. That makes me feel better.
Yeah, come on.
Oh, that's good. But oh well, I mean, we've talked about so much, but I mean, I have a few questions just to kind of just to wrap things up. And I mean, I don't want to, it's hard to even summarize or to put something into like digestible tips. But I think
Mhm.
one of the main takeaways that I hope people have from listening to this is just the importance of wellness and what that means, not
Mhm.
only from a physical perspective, but also a mental one. Um,
Mhm.
and can you, what, in your opinion, what is wellness?
Yeah, I think it's a trifecta. I think we have to address the physical body, the mental body, and the soulful body. And the mental body and wellness is the capacity to delve into some of the material we talked about today.
Mhm.
Um, so each day, in my experience, it's important to balance all three of those domains. And in our society, the physical gets most emphasis.
Mhm.
Um, and when we think about the mental, it's so attached to strange ideas like, oh, he's so mental, or mental illness,
Mhm.
or mental being, you're too cognitive, you're too intellectual. And so it's got its own challenges, but by mental in this conversation, when we're talking about wellness, what I mean is using the brain for something it's really good at, and that is reflecting on and following through with reading and analysis and writing and journaling and introspection, a theme or an idea. That's what I mean by mental, right?
Yeah.
And then when we get to the soulful piece, I didn't use spirit. Spirit is the shadow of soul, and that's a whole nother conversation. But soulfulness to me is respecting your unique character and learning how to listen to the call of the character within your own psyche. So that's that kind of contemplative walk or meditation or breathing exercises that allow us to access what we were talking about earlier when we talked about the mind.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's wonderful. I mean, I think I mean, I'd like to end it right there because I think you summarized it in three wonderful ways, and where people can kind of
Mm-hmm.
start to think about how they can incorporate this into their into their daily lives, aside from or with the physical part of being human and what it means to be an athlete.
Yeah, I think so. And I think what you say is the daily practice, and that's the key. It doesn't have to be all structured. Doesn't have to be timed, but
Mm.
it has to be deliberate, it has to be intentional, it has to be mindful. And in addition to that, it's not like we live on islands. We also have our relationship to the other. And so let me just add that on. That other can be a relationship with a loved one or a partner or siblings or family, or in my worldview, as importantly, to your community.
Mm.
So without that part, that would be maybe the fourth part in the daily practice, is
Yeah.
have some sort of community engagement. Now, I'm not talking necessarily volunteering at the food bank as an example. That'd be great. But I mean engaging with people in your community, kids on the street, old people, whomever, some sort of engagement in the community. Because if we're not careful, all of this can be kind of self-absorbed.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that's a It's a really good point. I mean, I talked to a good friend of mine on a previous episode, Alan Lim, and he talked about one of the main things about loneliness is I mean, I think he used the word like killer, but yeah, feeling this thing of being alone and interacting with your community can be so simple, or it can be as simple as sharing a meal with someone. But yeah.
Yeah, each day I make it a point of walking downtown to our community food co-op, where it's kind of a gathering for people at lunch. It's good food. It's not that expensive. And I interact with maybe a dozen people during that time. I could just take lunch in my office, but no, I make myself visible in community. And that's kind of what we're meaning here. It doesn't mean that you have to do anything in particular, but you have to show up in community and get outside your own brain and idea of yourself.
Yeah. I love that. That's such a good reminder. But thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Well, Hillary, I respect you and your people that you run with and the athlete community, so I'm glad to be of some service.
Oh, thank you so much.